Once upon a time, there were 6 engines living in a shed. One of the engines' name was Edward. The other engines jeered at him because he was old and couldn't be able to go out anymore. "The driver isn't going to choose you again, Edward," they said. "They only want big, strong engines like us." Just then, the driver and fireman came along to start work. They looked at Edward and felt sorry for him. "Would you like to come out today?" they asked. "Oh, yes, please," cried Edward happily. So the 2 men got into Edward's cab and lit the fire and made some steam. Edward was ready to leave the shed. He puffed into the turntable and spun around. It is not sure he pulled some raspberries, as did the other engines. But what's sure, they were very cross at being left behind. Edward puffed into the station yard. The coaches saw Edward and pleaded, "Please don't bang us like Thomas and the other engines do," they said. "How dare you?" said Thomas indignantly. "I never bang you." I'm sure the way that Thomas has treated the coaches, they would not like to remember this. So Edward backed onto the coaches very carefully and gently, with a nice bump. "I'd like to know how you do this, oldie," growled Thomas. Edward chose to ignore the sulking Thomas and turned his attention to the passengers, his first passengers in quite a long time. They were all happy to see Edward again and got quickly into the coaches. Edward waited patiently for the guard's whistle and its green flag, but it never turned up. "Where is that guard?" asked Edward. He was getting impatient. Just then, the guard ran onto the platform with a green flag in one hand, a whistle in the other, and a sandwich in his mouth. He tried to blow his whistle, realized it was all in vain, just waved the flag, and jumped into the carriage. Edward puffed off happily. Edward had a very busy and good day. He went through old stations, and he met some old friends he knew. He had a really happy day. "I'm going out again tomorrow," he said to the other engines. "What do you think of that?" But he didn't hear what they thought, because he was so tired and happy that he fell asleep at once. So, one of the big engines at the shed was Gordon. He had a number 4 on his tender, and he was blue, just like Edward. He was very proud. One morning he boasted, "Look out for me this afternoon when I fly through with the express, Edward. It will be a splendid sight for you." Edward didn't care. He'd rather play with the trucks instead. He was getting tired of Gordon's boasting. That day, he went to find some trucks to play with in the yard. He pushed one, and they banged up nicely. "Ow, ow, ow, ow!" they screamed. "Stop it! Stop it!" Edward chuckled. Every time Edward pushed a truck, it would roll into another line, and by the end of the morning, he had bundled up all the trucks into one siding. He reversed into his own siding with some other trucks, and then settled in for a nice snooze. Later that afternoon, Edward was woken up by a whistle. It was Gordon's whistle. He came through very slowly with a long line of dirty trucks instead of nice shiny coaches. "The shame of it! The shame of it! The shame of it!" he grumbled. Edward chuckled and went straight back to sleep. Later that day, Edward was simmering at the station when someone came up to him and said, "Gordon's stuck up a hill. You must come up and push him," he said. "Stuck up a hill, is he?" laughed Edward, and he went off with no refusal. Up on the hill, there was a heated argument going on between Gordon and his driver and fireman, with the addition of some laughing trucks in the background. "Come on, Gordon," said his crew. "You can make an effort, but you're not trying." "It's not my fault," said Gordon angrily. "It's these trucks that keep holding me back." "Gordon, even Thomas can pull 6 trucks up a hill." While they were having the argument, Edward finally arrived and stopped. "Come on, Gordon," laughed Edward. "You really don't want to pull these trucks." He went up to the last truck and biffed it. And with all his strength, he started pushing. He cried. "Come on, Gordon, you can do it," he cried. "We can do it," he cried, and did some extra effort. Gordon started moving too. "We can do it," he said, and he puffed up the hill. They started puffing in unison. "We can do it! We will do it! We can do it! We will do it!" cried Edward. "We can do it!" cried Gordon. And did a last extra effort. They pushed and pushed with all their might, and pushed and puffed, until Gordon finally found himself at the top of the hill. "I've done it! I've done it!" he cried, forgetting all about poor Edward behind. He rushed through the station. Poor Edward was puffed out when he pulled into the station. But his driver and fireman got out and said, "Well done, Edward. You really showed yourself up on the hill today. We'll give you a nice new coat of paint when you get home tonight." That made Edward feel very, very proud. Once an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. He went into a tunnel and squeaked through his funnel and never came out again. The engine's name was Henry. His driver and fireman argued with him to make him come out of the tunnel, but he just said, "The rain will spoil my lovely green paint and red stripes." The guard whistled until he had no more breath and waved his green flag until both his arms ached, but Henry wouldn't listen and just blew steam at them. The passengers came out and argued with Henry, but he would not move. "I'm not going to spoil my lovely green paint and red stripes for you," he said. Just then, the fat director appeared. He was one of the most important men on the railway, and he had an idea. "We shall pull you out," he said. He told the guard to get a rope, and within a few minutes, everyone was trying to give their best effort in pulling Henry out. But Henry wouldn't budge. Maybe it was because of the exception of one member that wasn't pulling, was the fat director. My doctor has forbidden me to pull," said the fat director. So the passengers gave it their best effort, and now Henry was even moving a few inches. But in the end, they got tired out, because he was a big machine. The fat director said, "We shall push you then," he said. So all the passengers lined up and pushed with all their effort. Well, everyone except for the fat director. "Oh, my doctor's forbidden me to pull as well," he said. Henry was so surprised he started to move, but then he realized what was going on and put his brakes on hard. "If you do not want to move," said the fat director severely, "we shall wall you up." That got Henry's attention. Before Henry could answer, Gordon took away his coaches, and the bricklayers were ready to start work. They worked so quickly to wall him up that by the time they were finished, it only took like 2 hours. Now Henry couldn't come out. All he could do was sit there watching trains rush by. Henry never intended to stay in the tunnel, but now it felt as if he was going to be there forever and never come out again. And I think he will. Don't you? It was another beautiful day on the island of Sodor. Everyone was working on the western part at Knapford Station, pushing and shunting trucks to Gordon, Edward, James, and the little blue guy over there. You know, him. The first 2 engines usually go through the tunnel where Henry was shut up. He was the only engine not enjoying the beautiful day. Edward whistled, "Beep, beep, hello." Well, Henry wasn't feeling very good. Of course, he was stuck in the tunnel, and he really wanted to come out and pull and push trains again. Gordon, on the other hand, he was very pompous, and when he rushed through the tunnel, he would say this: "Boop, boop, serves you right, ha." And he would rush through. Poor Henry. He was tired of Gordon, but he really wanted to show him what he could do. Now, Gordon, he was very proud of being the only engine strong enough to pull the big express. Lots of passengers paid good money to use this fast service, including the fat director who had punished Henry. Well, of course he didn't pay, because it was his railway. Gordon was seeing how fast he could go. He would pull the express so proudly as he would rush through stations and through other tunnels. But now, the one and only Henry's tunnel was coming up. "In a minute," he thought, "I shall rush through Henry's tunnel and whistle at him." But then he heard a loud noise, and then he started to brake. "Oh dear, what's happening?" he cried, as he came to a stop just outside Henry's tunnel. Oh dear, he cried. "Just where Henry is too," he moaned. "I was going so well. What happened? I feel so weak." Then he heard some giggling coming from the tunnel. Hee 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 hee. That was the most fun Henry had seen in a while. The driver had checked him. "Your safety valve burst, Gordon," he said. "You can't pull the train anymore." "Oh," moaned Gordon. "We were going so nicely too." With the remaining steam he had left, he puffed his way on the points and came back around and reversed onto the siding. As soon as Gordon was there, he made a face at Henry. "Stop it," he moaned. The yard manager was telephoned and was told to get another engine at once. So, the yard manager went to find another engine. The Blue Tender engine, commonly known as Edward. She told Edward that she had to go to Henry's tunnel and bail Gordon out. So Edward went as soon as possible. "Beep, beep," he whistled as he left the station yard. Edward soon arrived at the scene. "Oh no, him," groaned Gordon. He can't pull the train. The coaches are too heavy for him." Edward ignored him and coupled up to the coaches. He pulled and pulled and pulled and puffed, but then he just couldn't do it. The coaches were too heavy for him. "I told you so," said Gordon huffily. "Why don't let Henry try?" "That's an idea," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Henry, would you like to come out and pull this train?" "Oh, yes, please," cried Henry. He was delighted. "I'll have you ready in a minute." Well, within a few minutes, Henry was out and the wall was broken down. "You'd better go to somewhere and get your steam up," said the Topham Hatt, and off Henry went. He went to the yard and got on the turntable. He spun around and went back to the express. Henry came back and coupled up in front of Edward. Now they were all ready. Sir Topham Hatt signalled and got into the coaches, and the guard whistled, and then they were off. The coaches and the passengers all cheered and waved out the window. "Hooray!" they cried. "You've done it! You've done it!" The two engines were very proud, and they didn't stop until they arrived at the station at the end of the line. The passengers all got out and said thank you, and Sir Topham Hatt stepped out and said, "Would you like a new coat of paint, Henry?" He said, "Green would do you nice." "Oh, yes, please," said Henry, and he was so excited he blew off some steam. Shh! He blew so much that the Topham hat blew off and rolled into a field where a bunch of starving animals ate it for their tea. Then, at the end of the day, Edward and Henry came back and rescued their friend Gordon out of that lonely siding where he had been all day. They took him back home to the sheds, where all of them slept soundly for the night. Edward, Henry, and Gordon were all friends again.